You don't plan to take a bullet for the head of the city's most ruthless crime syndicate. You plan to finish your double shift, pick up your kid from the babysitter, and figure out how to stretch $20 until Tuesday. But when a man in a bespoke suit gets cornered by shooters in the lobby, you're paid to guard. Muscle memory takes over. I didn't save Kevin Rossi because I cared who he was. I saved him because my shift wasn't over, and I absolutely hate the sight of blood on freshly polished marble. The arch of Emma's foot throbbed in time with the low thumping bass leaking from the ballroom. She shifted her weight, the cheap polyester of her security uniform, scratching against her collarbone. 2 hours left. 2 hours until she could clock out of the opulent, suffocating air of the St. Regis Hotel, catch the D train, and relieve Mrs. Higgins of a sleeping 6-year-old. She checked her watch. A cracked screen illuminated the time, 11:42 p.m. Across the foyer, the VIPs were mingling. Men in suits that cost more than Emma's annual rent. Women draped in diamonds and bored expressions. Emma stood by the service elevators invisible. It was the best part of the job. Being invisible meant nobody asked her questions, and she didn't have to pretend to smile. She just had to stand there, a deterrent in a navy blue blazer, making sure none of the drunken socialites wandered into the kitchens. Then the elevator pinged. It wasn't a service ping. It was the private lift, the one reserved for the penthouse suites. The doors slid open. 3 men stepped out. 2 were large, built like brick walls draped in dark wool. Bodyguards. The man in the center was different. Mid-30s, sharp jawline eyes like flint. He wasn't smiling, but there was a relaxed, dangerous grace to the way he moved. Kevin Rossi. Emma recognized him from the local news, though the broadcasts usually used words like alleged and underworld in the same breath as his name. He didn't make it 5 steps. The rhythmic bass of the ballroom was suddenly shattered by a sharp cracking sound. Not a balloon popping, not a champagne cork. Gunfire. Suppressed, but Emma knew the sound. 4 tours in Kandahar before a blown knee sent her home with a piece of shrapnel, and an honorable discharge made sure of that. The larger of Kevin's bodyguards dropped instantly, a red mist blooming from his temple. The second reached for his jacket, but took 2 rounds to the chest, falling back into the elevator doors. Kevin dove behind a massive marble pillar as a trio of catering staff waiters who had been pouring champagne 2 minutes ago dropped their silver trays and drew suppressed pistols from beneath their aprons. Panic erupted. The foyer became a sea of screaming silk and tumbling bodies. Emma should have run. The manual for Vanguard event security explicitly stated, "Observe, report, evacuate." It did not say, "Engage hitmen," but Kevin Rossi was pinned behind the pillar. One of the fake waiters was flanking him left, another right. They were professionals. They were moving in for the kill. Emma didn't think. Thought was a luxury for people who hadn't spent their 20s kicking down doors in a desert. She lunged to her right, grabbing a heavy brass stanchion used for crowd control. She unhooked the velvet rope in one fluid motion, hefted the 50-pound brass pole, and threw it like a javelin directly at the knees of the waiter flanking right. The metal connected with a sickening crunch. The man screamed, his legs buckling. His gun clattered across the polished marble. Emma didn't stop moving. She slid across the floor, snatching the dropped weapon. The metal was still warm. The grip felt instantly familiar. The second waiter, startled by his partner's scream, pivoted toward Emma. He raised his weapon. Emma fired twice. Center mass. The man folded, collapsing into a display of white lilies. The third shooter realized the hit had gone south. He abandoned Kevin, turning his weapon wildly toward Emma. He was fast, but panic made him sloppy. His first shot shattered the mirror behind her, showering her shoulder in glass. Emma didn't flinch. She squeezed the trigger. A single shot. The man slumped against the wall, sliding down, leaving a thick crimson smear. Silence crashed back into the foyer, broken only by the distant, terrified weeping of guests hiding behind overturned tables. Emma stood up slowly. Her breathing was perfectly even. She engaged the safety on the pistol, placed it carefully on a nearby cocktail table, and wiped a speck of blood off her cheek with the back of her hand. From behind the pillar, Kevin Rossi stepped out. He was brushing dust off his lapel. He looked at his dead guards. He looked at the 3 dead hitmen. Finally, his eyes locked onto Emma. She was standing there, in her cheap, ill-fitting uniform hands, resting loosely at her sides. "You're bleeding," Kevin noted. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone. No tremor. No shock. Emma looked down at her shoulder where the glass had cut her. "I'm going to need workers' comp for this," she muttered. "And I'm definitely going to be late for the sitter." Kevin stared at her. A slow, incredulous smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. They didn't let her leave. 10 minutes after the shooting, the foyer swarmed, not with police, but with men in dark suits who moved with terrifying efficiency. They rolled the bodies in hotel rugs and carried them out through the service exits. They scrubbed the marble. They paid off the hotel manager in thick envelopes of cash. Emma sat in a folding chair in the hotel's industrial kitchen. Her blazer was off. A medic, one of Kevin's people, had patched her shoulder with a butterfly bandage. She stared at the stainless steel counters doing the math in her head. She was fired. That was certain. Vanguard security didn't keep guards who shot people even in self-defense. That meant no rent money for next month. That meant explaining to Mia why they were eating ramen for the 3rd week in a row. The heavy kitchen door swung open. Kevin walked in. He had taken off his jacket, revealing a pristine white shirt and a dark holster strapped across his ribs. He carried a tablet. He pulled up a metal stool and sat across from her. Up close, the lines of exhaustion around his eyes were visible. He didn't look like a kingpin. He looked like a CEO in the middle of a hostile takeover. "Emma Hayes," Kevin said, reading from the screen. 32. Discharged from the military police 6 years ago. Honorable. Combat medic training, extensive close quarters combat certifications. Currently employed by Vanguard Security for $19 an hour. He tossed the tablet onto the prep table. It clattered against a mixing bowl. "Why? Because $19 an hour buys groceries," Emma said flatly. "Can I go now? My daughter is at a babysitter who charges by the minute after midnight." Kevin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. 3 professionals from the Calabresi family tried to put a bullet in my head tonight. My own men I've paid very well for years were entirely unprepared. You took down 3 shooters with a borrowed gun and a piece of hotel furniture. "It was a reflex," Emma said, staring at her scuffed work shoes. "I thought they were going to shoot into the crowd." "I didn't do it for you." "I know," Kevin said softly. "That's what makes you interesting. You didn't hesitate. You didn't panic. You just neutralized the threat and complained about the paperwork." "Look, Mr. Rossi." "Kevin." "Mr. Rossi," she insisted. "I want absolutely nothing to do with whatever war you've got going on. I'm a mum. I pack lunches. I braid hair. Tonight was a fluke. Let me walk out that door, and I will forget I ever saw your face." Kevin didn't move. He just watched her, his dark eyes, analyzing every micro-expression on her face. "You're fired from Vanguard. You know that, right? You discharged a firearm. Liability nightmare." Emma swallowed hard. The truth stung. "I'll find another job. You have $6,000 in medical debt from your daughter's asthma hospitalizations last winter," Kevin stated. "You are 2 months behind on rent. You drive a 2011 sedan that failed inspection last week." Emma's spine went rigid. Her hands curled into fists on her lap. "You looked into my life in 20 minutes. I'm a thorough man," Kevin said, unbothered by her anger. "I need people who don't freeze when the glass shatters. I need someone guarding my back who isn't corrupted by the politics of my world. My world is entirely composed of men who want to take my place. You just want to pay your rent." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick stack of bills bound by a paper band. He slid it across the stainless steel table. "50,000 as a signing bonus," Kevin said. "3,000 a week. Health insurance, top tier, covers all asthma specialists. Dental. You shadow me. You keep me breathing." Emma stared at the money. It was more cash than she had seen in her entire life. It was a lifeline. It was safety for Mia. It was new tires, a warm apartment, and an inhaler that didn't have to be rationed. It was also blood money. "I'm not a criminal," Emma whispered, her eyes glued to the cash. "I'm not asking you to be," Kevin replied. "I have people to do the ugly things. I am asking you to be a shield. Protect me from the people who want to put me in the ground." Emma finally looked up at him. She saw no mockery, only cold, desperate pragmatism. He was bleeding from a scratch on his jaw. He was a target, and he knew it. 3,000 a week. Emma echoed her voice, devoid of emotion. "After taxes," Kevin confirmed. "And paid time off. I'm a mob boss. Emma, not a monster." A dry, bitter laugh escaped her lips. She stood up, wincing slightly as her bruised shoulder pulled. She reached across the table, grabbed the stack of cash, and shoved it into her jacket pocket. "My shift starts at 8, she said. "I have to drop Mia at school first." Kevin smiled. It was a small, genuine thing that briefly banished the shadows from his face. "I'll send a car." The black SUV idling outside Emma's crumbling apartment complex the next morning looked like a military vehicle that had been given a glossy paint job. It was absurdly out of place next to the rusted sedans and overflowing dumpsters of her neighborhood. Emma gripped Mia's small hand tightly as they walked down the cracked concrete steps. Mia, sporting a bright yellow raincoat and pigtails, stared at the behemoth vehicle in awe. "Are we riding in the monster truck, Mommy?" Mia asked, clutching her lunchbox. "Just for today, Bug," Emma said, keeping her voice light. A man in a sharp grey suit stepped out of the driver's seat. He was heavily built with a flattened nose that suggested a history in a boxing ring. He looked at Emma, then down at the 6-year-old, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Miss Hayes," he grunted. "Boss sent me. Name's Vincent." "Good morning, Vincent," Emma said briskly. "Does this thing have a booster seat?" Vincent blinked. "A what?" "A booster seat. It's the law, Vincent. I'm not putting my kid in a car without one." 10 minutes later, after transferring the stained, glitter-covered booster seat from Emma's dead sedan into the pristine leather interior of the armored SUV, they were on their way. Vincent drove with tense, white-knuckled grip, occasionally glaring at the rearview mirror as Mia loudly sang a song about a magical pony. Emma sat in the passenger seat, quietly checking the magazine of the Glock 19 Kevin had sent up in a lockbox that morning. It slid into her shoulder holster with a satisfying click. They dropped Mia off at the elementary school. Emma walked her to the gate, kissed her forehead, and waited until the bright yellow raincoat disappeared into the building. Only then did the tightness in her chest loosen. "To the office?" Vincent asked as she climbed back in. "Let's go to work." Kevin's office was a sprawling, heavily fortified compound disguised as a high-end import-export logistics center on the waterfront. The warehouse floor was filled with crates and forklifts, but the upper levels were pure glass steel and security checkpoints. When Emma walked into the main boardroom, the air went completely dead. 5 men sat around a massive mahogany table. They were hardened men, scars, tattoos peeking from under expensive cuffs' eyes that looked right through you. Kevin sat at the head, nursing a black coffee. "Gentlemen," Kevin said, not raising his voice, "this is Emma. She's taking over my personal detail." A man with slicked-back hair and a custom suit scoffed loudly. "You're kidding, right, boss? The rent-a-cop from the hotel." "She got lucky with a velvet rope. She killed 2 men and incapacitated a third in under 12 seconds, Dominic," Kevin replied mildly. "Where were you?" Dominic flushed angrily. "I was securing the perimeter. Look, Kevin, I get it. She surprised them. But this is the big leagues. She's a soccer mom. She's going to freeze when the real heat comes down." Emma didn't say a word. She walked slowly around the table, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the carafe on the sideboard. She took a sip. Black. Bitter. "Perfect." She set the mug down and looked at Dominic. "You carry a Sig Sauer," she noted, pointing to the slight bulge at his hip. "Appendix carry. You've got an expensive holster, but you don't practice your draw. Your belt is worn on the right side, meaning you rest your hand on it when you're nervous, but the leather around the snap is pristine. You hesitate before you pull." The room went dead silent. Dominic stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. "Listen here, sweetheart." "Sit down, Dominic," Kevin commanded softly. Dominic glared but slowly lowered himself. Emma leaned against the credenza, arms crossed. "I don't care about your egos. I don't care about your business operations. I don't care who sells what to whom. My job is to make sure your boss doesn't get his head blown off, because you idiots are too busy measuring yourselves against each other to watch the exits. So you can hate me. You can call me a soccer mum. But if you get in my way while I'm trying to do my job, I will break your kneecaps." "Understood." No one spoke. Kevin hid a smile behind his coffee mug. "Good," Emma said, clapping her hands together once. "Now, Mr. Rossi, you have a meeting at a restaurant downtown at noon. The windows are plate glass and face a busy street. We're moving it to the back room, or you're not going." Kevin set his mug down. "The back room is currently a storage closet." "Then we'll move the brooms," Emma said flatly. For the first time since she met him, Kevin Rossi threw his head back and genuinely laughed. It was a rich, warm sound that seemed entirely out of place in a room full of killers. "You heard the lady?" Kevin said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Let's go clear out some brooms." As Emma followed him out the door, she felt the burning stares of the men behind her. She had just made 5 new enemies. But as she touched the cold steel resting against her ribs, she realized something strange. For the first time in years, she didn't feel exhausted. She felt awake. Trattoria D'Angelo smelled heavily of garlic-roasted fennel and the sharp chemical bite of industrial floor cleaner. Emma stood by the heavy steel door of the dry storage room, adjusting her posture to keep her gun-side hip angled away from the center of the room. True to her word, the meeting had been moved. Kevin sat on a wooden folding chair, a pristine linen napkin draped over his knee, eating a plate of veal scallopini off a table constructed from 3 stacked pallets of San Marzano tomatoes. He looked entirely unbothered. Across from him sat Arthur Sullivan. Arthur was an old-school racketeer who still wore fedoras without a trace of irony and owned half the construction unions on the eastern seaboard. He did not look unbothered. He looked like a man who had been asked to eat out of a dog bowl. "This is a joke, Kevin," Arthur said, his voice a thick, grating rasp. He pushed his plate away. "My father sat with your father in the main dining room. Front window. Everyone saw them. Now I'm eating next to the mop buckets." Your father didn't put a hit out on my father, Kevin replied casually. He cut a piece of veal. Times change, Arthur. The Calabrese family is making a play. I'm not giving them a clean sightline just to stroke your ego. Arthur's face darkened, the veins in his thick neck straining against his collar. Behind him stood two men. They were wide, heavily muscled, and wore suits that fit poorly over their shoulder holsters. Emma tracked their eyes. The one on the left was sweating. The one on the right kept shifting his weight, his fingers twitching near his jacket button. I have nothing to do with Leo Calabrese, Arthur spat. I'm a neutral party. There are no neutral parties when bullets start flying, Kevin said finally, setting his fork down. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the tomato boxes. The easy conversational tone vanished. Suddenly, Emma saw the man who ran a criminal empire. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You let Calabrese's men use your shipping lanes to bring those shooters into the city last night. 3 dead hitmen. My hotel. My mess. I run cargo, Kevin. I don't check the manifests for every rat that crawls aboard. You check exactly who gets on your boats. Kevin countered, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. You took a payout to look the other way. I want the routes shut down. Tonight? Arthur slammed his fist onto the makeshift table. You don't give me orders, boy. The moment Arthur yelled, the bodyguard on the right made his move. He didn't draw, but he stepped forward, closing the distance to Kevin by 2 aggressive feet, his hand slipping inside his jacket. Emma didn't shout. She didn't issue a warning. She moved in a blur of practiced kinetic violence. 3 strides across the concrete floor. She grabbed the bodyguard's right wrist with her left hand, twisting it sharply outward to lock the joint, while her right hand drew her Glock 19. She drove the steel barrel directly into the soft tissue under his jawbone. The man froze, a choked gasp escaping his lips. Take your hand out of the jacket, Emma whispered. Her voice was steady, devoid of adrenaline. It was the voice of a mother telling a child to put down a fragile vase. Do it slowly, using only 2 fingers. If you grip the weapon, I will blow your teeth out the top of your skull. The room was deathly quiet. The hum of the industrial refrigerator in the corner sounded like a jet engine. Slowly, agonizingly, the bodyguard withdrew his empty hand. Emma didn't look at Arthur. She didn't look at Kevin. Her eyes were locked on the sweating man in front of her. Step back against the flour sacks, hands on your head. Interlock your fingers. The man complied, his knees trembling slightly. Arthur stared at Emma, his mouth hanging open in shock. He looked back at Kevin. Kevin hadn't even flinched. He was taking a sip of his San Pellegrino. You brought a woman into my meeting, Arthur demanded, though the bluster was completely gone from his voice. He sounded rattled. I brought my head of security into my meeting, Kevin corrected smoothly. And she's very particular about personal space. Now, the shipping routes, Arthur. Are they closed? Arthur swallowed hard, his eyes darting to Emma, who was now disarming his man with one hand while keeping the gun leveled. Yeah, Arthur muttered. They're closed. Excellent. Give my regards to your wife. 10 minutes later, Emma was sitting in the front passenger seat of the armored SUV, staring out at the rain-slicked streets. Vincent was driving, taking a circuitous route back to the compound. Kevin sat in the back, typing emails on his phone. You knew he wasn't going to shoot, Emma said, suddenly breaking the silence. Kevin stopped typing. He looked up, catching her eyes in the rearview mirror. Excuse me. The guy in the storage room. The bodyguard. Emma said, turning in her seat to face him. His thumb was on the outside of his lapel. If he was drawing a weapon, his thumb would be inside to clear the fabric. He was just stepping up to intimidate you, because his boss was yelling. Kevin held her gaze. And yet you put a gun to his throat. Because he broke the perimeter. Because I don't take chances, Emma snapped. But you knew that. You brought me in there to prove a point. You used me to scare Arthur Sullivan. I used you to show Arthur Sullivan that my house is in order. Kevin corrected his tone, maddeningly calm. Dominic and the rest of my men are muscle. They flex. They shout. They escalate. You're clinical. You neutralized a 200-pound man without raising your pulse. Arthur will tell everyone in the city about the ice-cold woman guarding my back. That reputation keeps me alive. Emma gripped the leather armrest. I'm not your psychological weapon, Kevin. I'm a bodyguard. Don't play games with me. Kevin closed his laptop. He leaned forward, the shadows of the passing streetlights washing over his face. In this life, Emma, everything is a game. The day you stop playing is the day they put you in a box. You did exactly what I paid you to do. You protected me. Emma turned back around, staring out the windshield at the grey, weeping city. She reached into her bag, her fingers brushing past a spare magazine and resting on a crumpled juice box she had packed for Mia that morning. Two completely different worlds rubbing against each other. She wondered how long it would be until the friction started a fire. 3 weeks. That was how long it took for the fire to catch. In those 3 weeks, Emma's life transformed into a bizarre, high-stakes routine. She woke up at 5, packed Mia, a lunch, checked the perimeter of her newly rented, highly secure townhouse, and went to work. She spent her days shadowing Kevin through boardrooms, back-alley clubs, and high-end restaurants. She learned the rhythms of his world. She learned that Dominic was stealing from the lower-level runners, but Kevin was letting him do it until he found a replacement. She learned that Kevin drank his coffee, Black hated the opera, but bought a box seat anyway for appearances, and carried a titanium-plated pen that could puncture a windpipe. She also learned to stop checking her bank account. The money was there. The medical debt was gone. Mia had a new inhaler in her backpack, one in Emma's purse, and a spare in the glove box of the armored SUV. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 2:15 p.m. They were leaving a commercial real estate office in the financial district, a legitimate business meeting, nothing illicit. Vincent pulled the SUV up to the curb. Emma stood on the sidewalk scanning the crowds, businessmen with umbrellas, a hot dog vendor, a bike messenger weaving through traffic. Kevin stepped out of the revolving doors. "Clear," Emma murmured into her earpiece, though she knew Vincent could hear her perfectly fine through the open window. Kevin approached the car. Emma reached out to open the door. That was when the street exploded. It didn't start with a bang. It started with the catastrophic shattering of glass as the rear window of the SUV disintegrated. Emma's military instincts bypassed her conscious brain. She grabbed Kevin by the lapels of his suit and threw all her weight backward, dragging him to the wet pavement, just as a volley of automatic gunfire chewed through the space where his chest had been a millisecond before. "Down!" Emma screamed. A black panel van had blown a red light and skidded to a halt diagonally across the intersection. The side door was open. 2 men with short-barreled rifles were pouring lead into the SUV. The hot dog vendor screamed, abandoning his cart. Pedestrians scattered like roaches under a light. Emma scrambled, dragging Kevin behind the heavy armored engine block of their vehicle. Bullets sparked against the reinforced steel, tearing chunks out of the sidewalk and shredding the tires. "Vincent!" Emma yelled, drawing her Glock. The driver's side door kicked open. Vincent spilled out onto the asphalt. He wasn't moving right. He dragged himself toward the front of the car, leaving a thick, dark streak of blood on the wet pavement. "Leg!" Vincent grunted, his face, pale teeth gritted in agony. "They got my femoral, Emma." Emma's heart slammed against her ribs. Femoral artery. He had maybe 3 minutes before he bled out. "Cover us!" Emma shouted at Kevin. She shoved her spare magazine into his chest. Kevin didn't hesitate. He grabbed the magazine, pulled a compact Sig Sauer from his hip, and popped up over the hood of the car, laying down 3 precise, suppressed shots toward the van. He wasn't a soldier, but he shot like a man who had been raised around violence. Emma slid across the wet concrete, ignoring the glass, biting into her knees. She reached Vincent. His right leg was a mess of torn fabric and pulsing bright red blood. "Hold still, you stubborn idiot!" Emma barked. She holstered her weapon and ripped open Vincent's pant leg. The blood was spurting in time with his heartbeat. A classic arterial bleed. She dug into a tactical belt, bypassing the spare ammo, and pulled out a SOF-T tourniquet. She slipped the loop over his heavy boot and yanked it up his thigh, high and tight above the wound. Gunfire hammered the roof of the car. Kevin ducked down, dodging a ricochet that sparked off the side mirror. "They're advancing!" Kevin yelled over the deafening roar. "2 moving left." Emma grabbed the windlass rod of the tourniquet and twisted it savagely. Vincent let out a guttural, choked scream. "Sorry," Emma grunted. "Better crying than dying." She twisted it a second time, locking the rod into the clip. The spurting blood immediately slowed to a dark ooze. She grabbed Vincent's collar and hauled him behind the tire, putting solid steel between him and the shooters. "You good to shoot?" she asked him, her hands slick with his blood. Vincent weakly raised his weapon. "Yeah, go." Emma popped up from behind the engine block. She acquired the first target, a man in a ski mask flanking, left behind a mailbox. She fired twice. The man jerked backward and dropped. Sirens wailed in the distance. The police response time in the financial district was under 3 minutes. The shooters knew it. The remaining men laid down, suppressing fire, hopped back into the van, and the tires shrieked as they burned rubber down the avenue, disappearing into the chaotic afternoon traffic. Silence descended heavy and ringing. Emma kept her gun raised, tracking the retreating van until it was out of sight. Slowly she lowered the weapon. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the adrenaline crash. She looked over at Kevin. He was sitting with his back against the bullet-riddled bumper of his $500,000 SUV. His suit was ruined, soaked in dirty street water. He was staring at her. "You're bleeding," Kevin said softly. Emma looked down. A piece of shrapnel had caught her forearm. She hadn't even felt it. She wiped her bloody hands on her pants, leaving dark crimson smears against the tactical fabric. "I'm fine," she breathed out, her chest heaving. She knelt beside Vincent. He was pale and sweaty, but he was breathing. The tourniquet held. "Ambulance is coming, Vince. You're going to keep your leg." Vincent looked up at her, a weak, cynical smile touching his lips. "Soccer mom, huh?" Emma managed a tight, humorless smile. "Shut up, Vincent." She stood up and walked over to Kevin. She offered him a blood-stained hand. Kevin looked at it for a moment, then gripped it firmly. She hauled him to his feet. They stood there in the wreckage of the street, the sound of approaching sirens growing deafening. "That wasn't a warning shot," Emma said, her voice dropping so only he could hear. "That was an execution squad. Someone sold our route." Kevin's eyes hardened, the flint returning to them. The momentary vulnerability vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating kingpin. "I know." "Who knew the schedule?" "Me, Vincent." Kevin paused. The rain started to fall harder, washing the blood down the storm drains. "And Dominic." Emma felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The hostility in the boardroom wasn't just bruised ego. It was ambition. "I'm going to kill him," Kevin said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of geographical fact, like saying the sun would rise. He looked at Emma. He saw the blood on her hands, the dirt on her face, and the unwavering, terrifying competence in her eyes. "This changes things, Emma. The war just started. You can walk away right now. Take the money I've paid you and disappear. Because if you stay in this car, you're not just my shield anymore. You're my soldier." Emma looked at the shattered glass. She thought of Mia's new inhaler. She thought of the $50,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account that meant her daughter would never have to wear second-hand shoes again. She looked back at Kevin. "I don't walk away from a contract," Emma said evenly, "but my rate just doubled." Kevin actually smiled. It was a grim, bloody thing. "Deal. Now help me find my pen. I dropped it when you threw me at the asphalt." The hydraulic lift whined a high, metallic squeal that echoed through the cavernous space of the luxury auto garage. Dominic was wiping down the chrome bumper of a vintage 1969 Mustang. He wore a mechanic's jumpsuit unzipped to the waist, a cigar clamped between his teeth. The garage was supposed to be empty. It was his private sanctuary, a place bought and paid for by skimming off the top of Kevin's waterfront shipments. Emma stood in the shadows near the rolling steel door. She had bypassed the electronic keypad in 40 seconds using a bypassed relay switch. 2 of Dominic's personal guards were currently zip-tied and unconscious in the trunk of a nearby Audi. She tapped the comms unit in her ear twice. "Clear." The side door creaked open. Kevin walked in. He had changed out of the ruined suit from the ambush. He wore dark jeans, a black turtleneck, and a leather jacket. He looked less like a businessman and more like the violent street kid he had been 20 years ago. Dominic froze. The rag slipped from his hand, hitting the grease-stained concrete with a soft slap. He didn't reach for his gun. It was sitting on a toolbox 10 feet away. Emma had already emptied the magazine just in case. "Boss," Dominic said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the usual bravado. "What are you doing here? It's past midnight." Kevin didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly around the Mustang, running a hand over the immaculate paint job. "Candy apple red. Beautiful work, Dom. Really. Must have cost a fortune. I know a guy. Gave me a discount." "A discount," Kevin mused. He stopped at the front of the car, leaning against the hood. He looked at Dominic. "Vincent is in surgery. They had to graft a piece of a synthetic artery into his leg. The doctors say he might walk with a cane for the rest of his life. If he doesn't throw a clot and die by morning, that is." Dominic's face drained of color. He took a half step backward. "I heard about the hit. Animals, boss. Calabrese is getting desperate. You need me to rally the boys. We can hit their clubs tonight." "We aren't hitting anyone tonight," Kevin said. He pulled something from his jacket pocket. A thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the hood of the Mustang. It slid and hit Dominic in the chest. Dominic fumbled, catching it. He looked inside. Emma watched from the dark. She knew what was in the envelope. Bank statements, wire transfers from a holding company owned by Leo Calabrese, routed through 3 shell corporations, ending in an offshore account with Dominic's name on it. Kevin's forensic accountant was just as lethal as his hitmen. $500,000, Kevin said softly. "That's what my life is worth to you, Dom. After 12 years. Gabe, listen to me," Dominic pleaded, dropping the envelope. The papers scattered across the floor. "It wasn't like that. Calabrese cornered me. He threatened my sister. He said if I didn't give up the route, he'd burn her house down with her kids inside. You don't have a sister, Dominic." The lie hung in the air, pathetic and heavy. Dominic's eyes darted frantically around the garage landing on the toolbox where his gun rested. He took a step toward it. "Don't!" Emma's voice rang out from the darkness. She stepped into the overhead fluorescent light. Her Glock was drawn, held at a low ready, but her posture was unmistakable. Dominic stared at her, then back at Kevin. The realization settled over him like a suffocating blanket. He wasn't talking his way out of this. You're gonna let the rent-a-cop shoot me? Dominic spat, fear twisting into venom. No, Kevin said. He pushed himself off the car. She's just here to make sure we aren't interrupted. Kevin closed the distance between them. Dominic threw a wild, desperate punch. Kevin slipped beneath it with terrifying speed, driving a vicious hook into Dominic's ribs. The crack of bone was loud over the hum of the garage ventilation. Dominic doubled over, gasping for air. Kevin grabbed him by the collar of his jumpsuit and slammed him back against the side of the Mustang. I trusted you, Kevin whispered, his forearm pressed against Dominic's throat. I let you steal from me because I thought you were loyal where it counted. Kevin drew the titanium-plated pen from his pocket, the one Emma had retrieved from the bloody asphalt hours ago. Emma looked away. She stared at a rack of tires against the far wall. She controlled her breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. She was a soldier. She understood the mechanics of war. Treason in an army meant a firing squad. Treason in the Mafia meant a dark garage and a lack of witnesses. She didn't try to stop it. She didn't feel sorry for Dominic. He had sold out Vincent. He had nearly gotten her killed. But she didn't want to watch the light leave his eyes. A choked gasp, a heavy thud against the concrete, then silence. Emma turned her head back. Kevin was standing over the body. He wiped the pen on a clean shop rag, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't look triumphant. He looked exhausted. Call the cleaners, Kevin said, his voice flat. Emma tapped her comms. We need a clean-up crew at the South Side garage. Standard protocol. She walked over to Kevin. He was staring at his hands. There was a faint tremor in his fingers. It was the first time she had seen him show any physical sign of the toll his life took on him. Without thinking, she reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a clean handkerchief. She handed it to him. Kevin looked at the cloth, then at her. He took it, wiping a speck of blood from his knuckles. You didn't watch. I'm paid to watch for threats, Emma said evenly. He wasn't a threat anymore. Does this bother you? Kevin asked, gesturing to the floor. This life. Emma looked at Dominic's body, then met Kevin's eyes. My landlord used to shut off the heat in January when I was $20 short on rent. I've held my daughter while she turned blue because I couldn't afford a trip to the ER. There's a lot of violence in the world, Kevin. Yours is just louder. Let's go home. The townhouse was quiet. It was a fortress disguised as a family home. Kevin had moved Emma and Mia here 3 days after the hotel shooting. It had reinforced steel doors, shatterproof glass, and a state-of-the-art security system that Emma had immediately recalibrated to her own paranoid specifications. It was 3 a.m. Emma sat at the kitchen island, a disassembled Glock 19 spread out on a microfiber mat in front of her. The smell of gun oil mixed with the lingering scent of the cinnamon toast she had made Mia for dinner. She was running a bore brush through the barrel when the perimeter alarm chimed. A soft double beep on her phone. Someone was at the front gate. Emma dropped the brush, slapped the slide onto the frame of her backup weapon, and racked it in one fluid motion. She pulled up the security cameras on her tablet. Kevin was standing on her front porch. He was alone. The rain was coming down in sheets, soaking his hair and his leather jacket. Emma frowned, lowering the weapon. She walked through the dark living room, careful to avoid the minefield of scattered Lego bricks on the rug, and opened the heavy front door. Kevin stood there, dripping water onto the welcome mat that read, "Please go away." "It's 3 a.m, Emma said, leaning against the doorframe. "I know," Kevin said. He didn't make a move to come inside. He just stood in the rain. "I couldn't sleep." Emma studied him. The adrenaline of the garage had burned off, leaving behind a hollow, haunted exhaustion. He looked like a man carrying the weight of a crumbling empire. Get inside before you catch pneumonia, and I have to fill out more paperwork. She sighed, stepping back to let him pass. Kevin stepped into the foyer. He took off his wet jacket, hanging it on a hook next to a tiny pink raincoat. He stared at the two coats for a long moment. "Kitchen," Emma ordered quietly. "Keep your voice down. Mia's a light sleeper." They moved into the kitchen. Emma grabbed a towel from the oven handle and tossed it to him. Kevin caught it, roughly drying his hair. "Do you want a drink?" Emma asked. "I don't have scotch. I have tap water, cheap coffee, and half a box of apple juice." "Tap water is fine," Kevin said, taking a seat on one of the bar stools. Emma filled a glass and slid it across the granite counter. She went back to reassembling her primary weapon. The mechanical clicks of the gun parts snapping together were the only sounds in the room. "Calabrese is making his final push," Kevin said suddenly, staring at the water glass. "With Dominic gone, there's a vacuum in the waterfront operations. They're going to try and seize the docks by the end of the week. If they take the docks, they choke my supply lines. If they choke my supply lines, my capos will turn on me." "So we reinforce the docks," Emma said, locking the slide of her Glock into place. "It's not that simple. It's a bloodbath waiting to happen." Kevin rubbed his temples. "I'm thinking about sending you away. You and the kid. I have a property in upstate New York, secure, off the grid. You'd be safe until this blows over." Emma stopped wiping down the gun. She looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp, entirely lacking in the deference his men showed him. "I signed a contract, Kevin. I am voiding the contract for your own safety." He fired back, his voice rising slightly. "This isn't a hotel lobby anymore, Emma. This is a war zone. I won't have your daughter caught in the crossfire because you're too stubborn to run." "My daughter is perfectly safe right here," Emma said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And I don't run. I tried running from the military, from the debt, from the poverty. It always caught up. For the first time in my life, I have the resources to fight back. I'm not leaving." They stared at each other across the kitchen island. The tension between them was electric heavy with unspoken things. It wasn't just about a contract anymore. They both knew it. Before Kevin could argue, a small, sleepy voice broke the silence. "Mommy." Emma whipped around. Kevin stiffened. Mia stood in the hallway, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. She was wearing mismatched pajamas and rubbing her eyes. She stopped when she saw the stranger at the counter. Emma immediately moved around the island, dropping to one knee. "Hey, Bug. What are you doing up, Bad Dream?" "Thirsty?" Mia mumbled, peeking over Emma's shoulder at Kevin. "Who's that?" Emma glanced back at the Mafia boss. Kevin Rossi, the man who had ordered executions and crippled crime syndicates, looked utterly terrified of a 6-year-old girl in dinosaur pajamas. "This is Mr. Gabe's sweetheart," Emma said softly. "He's my boss." Kevin slowly raised a hand in an awkward wave. "Hello, Mia." Mia blinked at him. She walked past Emma, shuffling right up to where Kevin sat. She tilted her head, inspecting him. "You're wet," Mia observed astutely. "It's raining outside," Kevin replied, his gravelly voice incredibly gentle. "You should wear a coat. Mummy says if you don't wear a coat, you get the sniffles." Kevin looked at Emma, a rare, genuine smile breaking through the gloom on his face. He looked back at Mia. "Your mummy is very smart. I'll remember that next time." Emma poured a small cup of water and handed it to Mia. The little girl drank it in 3 large gulps, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and yawned massively. "Okay, back to bed. Tiny terror," Emma said, scooping her up. Mia rested her head heavily against Emma's shoulder. "Night, Mr. Gabe." Mia mumbled into Emma's neck. "Good night, Mia," Kevin said softly. Emma carried her down the hall, tucked her in, and waited until the rhythmic breathing returned. When she walked back into the kitchen, Kevin was standing by the front door, putting on his wet leather jacket. "You don't have to leave yet," Emma said. Kevin paused his hand on the doorknob. He looked back at her. The harsh lines of his face were softened by the dim hall light. "Yeah, I do," Kevin said quietly. "Because if I stay in this house much longer, I'm going to start believing I belong in a place like this, and that will get us both killed." He opened the door and stepped back out into the rain. The lock clicked shut behind him. Emma stood in the quiet hallway for a long time. She walked over to the keypad, engaged the deadbolts, and armed the perimeter alarm. She checked the camera feed. Kevin's taillights were disappearing down the street. She walked back to the kitchen, picked up her freshly oiled gun, and slid a full magazine into the grip. The click echoed in the empty room. The war was coming, but Emma was already armed. The fog rolling off the Atlantic was thick enough to chew. It clung to the rusted shipping containers of Pier 44, dampening the sound of the churning black water below. Midnight. The witching hour for men who made their living in the dark. Emma stood atop a stack of 3 steel cargo crates. She had the high ground. From here she could see the main gate, the loading warehouse, and the narrow alleyway between the administration buildings. She adjusted the optics on the suppressed Daniel Defense Mk-18 rifle pressed into her shoulder, the cold metal bit through her tactical gloves. Below her in the floodlit loading bay, Kevin waited. He wasn't hiding. He sat on the hood of his armored SUV, smoking a cigarette he had bummed from one of his remaining loyal men. He was bait. Calabrese was coming to take the docks tonight. Kevin had leaked the schedule of a massive incoming shipment of untraceable pharmaceuticals. It was a lie, but it was a lie worth $20 million. Calabrese wouldn't resist. Emma tapped her earpiece. Perimeter check. Sound off. The radio crackled. Emma had spent the last 48 hours restructuring Kevin's surviving security forces. She had stripped away the ego, the bravado, and the mob mentality, replacing it with rigid military precision. She had divided the pier into 3 fatal funnels. Sector Alpha, the main gate, rigged with spike strips and a heavy barricade of empty shipping containers. Sector Bravo, the warehouse floor. Kevin's location, heavily fortified, plenty of hard cover. Sector Charlie, the waterfront edge, guarded by 2 men with heavy suppression weapons to prevent a boat insertion. Alpha Clear, a gruff voice reported. Charlie Clear, another chimed in. Emma shifted her weight. Her ribs ached from the tension. She looked down at Kevin through the scope. He flicked his cigarette into a puddle. He didn't look up, but he tapped 2 fingers against his chest right over his heart. A silent acknowledgement. I trust you. Then the main gate exploded. It wasn't a metaphor. A stolen municipal garbage truck slammed into the steel gates at 60 miles an hour, tearing the reinforced hinges out of the concrete pillars. The spike strips blew the front tires, but the sheer mass of the vehicle carried it deep into Sector Alpha before it ground to a screeching, sparking halt. The back of the truck blew open. Men poured out like hornets from a kicked nest. "Contact Alpha!" Emma yelled into the comms. "Engage!" The docks erupted. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the foggy night. Tracers lit up the mist, drawing deadly neon lines through the air. Calabrese hadn't sent a strike team. He had sent an army. There were at least 30 of them, armed with assault rifles and absolute desperation. They swarmed the barricades, pinning down Kevin's men at the gate. Emma didn't panic. She breathed in the smell of salt water and cordite. She exhaled. She squeezed the trigger. Crack. Crack, crack. 3 precision shots. 3 of Calabrese's point men dropped before they even realized they were being fired upon from above. "They're bypassing Alpha, pushing to Bravo," A panicked voice screamed over the radio. Emma pivoted her rifle. 10 men were sprinting down the alleyway toward the loading bay, where Kevin was waiting. They were moving fast, using the shadows. "Kevin, they're flanking your left," Emma warned. Kevin didn't retreat. He drew his Sig Sauer, moving behind a stack of wooden pallets. The first 2 shooters rounded the corner. Kevin dropped them with clinical ruthless efficiency, but there were too many. Suppressive fire chewed through the wooden pallets, splintering the cover and forcing Kevin to the ground. He was pinned. Emma tracked the shooters through her optics, but the angle was wrong. The edge of a container blocked her line of sight to the men pinning Kevin. She couldn't stay on the high ground. Emma slung the rifle over her shoulder, drew her Glock and vaulted over the edge of the container. She dropped 12 feet, landing in a crouch on the wet asphalt, the shock absorbing through her boots and radiating up her knees. She sprinted, not away from the gunfire, directly into it. She flanked the flankers. She moved with a silent, terrifying grace, coming up behind the 8 remaining men who were pouring lead into Kevin's position. Emma raised her weapon. She didn't hesitate. She fired. She dropped 3 of them in rapid succession before the others realized the threat was behind them. They spun wildly. A large man with a scarred neck swung a heavy shotgun toward Emma. Emma fired, but the man pulled his trigger a fraction of a second earlier. The blast of buckshot hit Emma squarely in the chest. The kinetic force was like being kicked by a draft horse. It lifted her off her feet and threw her backward. She hit the asphalt hard, all the air violently expelled from her lungs. Darkness edged her vision. The world muted into a high-pitched ringing. "Get up." Her training screamed, "Get up or you die." Emma gasped, pulling air into her burning lungs. Pain radiated from her sternum, sharp and agonizing, but she could breathe. The level 3 Kevlar plating she had worn beneath her tactical jacket had held. Cracked ribs, massive bruising, but no penetration. She rolled onto her side, fighting the wave of nausea. The scarred man was pumping the action of his shotgun, racking another shell, stepping toward her to finish the job. Before he could raise the barrel, a shadow moved behind him. Kevin. He didn't shoot. He closed the distance in a blur, driving the titanium pen deep into the soft tissue beneath the man's ear. The giant crumpled instantly. Kevin dropped the pen. He kicked the shotgun away. The remaining shooters, seeing their squad decimated and their leader dead, broke formation and fled back toward the ruined gates. Sirens were beginning to wail in the distance. The police were coming. The war was over. Kevin dropped to his knees on the wet asphalt next to Emma. His hands were shaking. He reached for her, his fingers frantic as he searched for blood. "Where?" Kevin demanded, his voice cracking. "Where are you hit?" Emma groaned, swatting his hands away weakly. Vest caught it. "Don't touch me. I think you broke my ribs just by looking at them." Kevin slumped back on his heels. He ran a blood-stained hand through his wet hair. He let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like a sob. "You jumped off the container," Kevin said, staring at her as if she were a ghost. "You gave up the high ground." "You were pinned," Emma grunted, forcing herself into a sitting position. She winced, pressing a hand to her chest. "Observe, report, evacuate." "Remember, you're terrible at the evacuating part." Kevin didn't smile. He leaned forward, wrapping his arms around her. He pulled her against his chest, careful of her ribs, burying his face in her shoulder. It wasn't the embrace of a Mafia boss. It was the embrace of a man who had almost lost the only thing keeping him tethered to his humanity. Emma froze for a second. Then slowly she wrapped her arms around him too. "Let's go home, boss," Emma whispered. "Yeah," Kevin breathed against her neck. "Let's go home." The kitchen smelled of burnt butter, cheap coffee, and the faint, lingering scent of antiseptic cream. It was 7 a.m. on a Sunday, 5 days after the docks. Emma sat at the island wearing sweatpants and one of Kevin's oversized black t-shirts. Her chest was wrapped tightly in bandages beneath the cotton. Every time she breathed too deeply, a sharp pain shot through her left side, a violent reminder of the buckshot. She watched the man at the stove. Kevin Rossi was attempting to flip a pancake. He looked entirely out of his element. He was wearing dark jeans and a Henley shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal a faded tattoo on his forearm. He approached the frying pan with the same intense, calculating focus he usually reserved for hostile negotiations. He slid the spatula under the batter. He flicked his wrist. The pancake executed a sloppy half-rotation and landed on the edge of the pan, folding over itself into a mutilated crescent. Kevin sighed heavily. "You're crowding the pawn," Emma noted, taking a sip of her black coffee. "I run a criminal syndicate across 3 states," Kevin muttered, prodding the ruined dough with his spatula. "I should be able to master complex carbohydrates." "You intimidate the dough. You have to finesse it." Kevin turned off the burner and scraped the mess onto a plate, setting it on the counter. He walked over to Emma, leaning his elbows on the marble island across from her. "Calabresi reached out this morning," Kevin said quietly. The easy domesticity faded, replaced by the grim reality of their lives. "He sued for peace. He's surrendering the northern routes and paying a heavy tax for the damage to the gate." Emma traced the rim of her coffee mug. "And you accepted?" "I did." Kevin looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "Because going after him means more war. It means more shootouts. It means you taking more bullets for me. And I am officially done watching you bleed." Emma met his gaze. There was a shift in the power dynamic. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She was the woman who had held the line when his own men had run. She was his equal. "Vincent gets out of rehab next week," Emma said, changing the subject slightly. "He's going to need a desk job, something in logistics." "Done," Kevin said without hesitation. The sound of small, rapid footsteps echoed down the hallway. Mia burst into the kitchen wearing her dinosaur pajamas and clutching her stuffed rabbit. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at the ruined pancake on the counter. "That looks like a sad slug," Mia declared. Kevin actually laughed. It was a rich, unburdened sound. "It does, Mia. I apologize. My culinary skills are severely lacking." Mia sighed a dramatic 6-year-old sigh. She walked over to the cabinet, pulled out a box of sugary cereal, and dragged a stool over to the counter. "It's okay, Mr. Gabe," Mia said, patting his arm sympathetically. "Mommy burns the toast sometimes. We just scrape the black stuff off." Kevin looked at Emma. A soft, knowing smile played on his lips. "So," Kevin said, leaning closer to Emma across the island, "your contract. It technically states you are my personal bodyguard, Monday through Friday with on-call weekend hours." Emma raised an eyebrow, ignoring the throbbing in her ribs. "You want to talk HR right now?" "I want to renegotiate," Kevin said. He reached out his fingers, lightly brushing her knuckles where they rested on the cold marble. "I don't want a bodyguard anymore, Emma." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at his hand, large and scarred, resting gently over hers. "What do you want, Kevin?" "A partner," he said simply. "In the boardroom, on the streets, here, in this kitchen." He didn't offer her poetry. He didn't promise her safety, because they both knew safety was an illusion in their world. He offered her the truth. He offered her a place by his side, not behind it. Emma looked at her daughter happily crunching on colorful cereal, oblivious to the violence that had paid for the milk. She looked at Kevin, a man forged in blood who was desperately trying to learn how to make breakfast. It was a messy, dangerous, chaotic life. But for the first time in her life, Emma didn't want to run. She turned her hand over, tangling her fingers with his. She squeezed firmly. "I'm going to need a raise," Emma whispered, a cynical smile touching her lips. Kevin leaned in, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. "Whatever you want, boss." And that's how a minimum-wage security guard rewrote the rules of the underworld. Emma didn't just survive the Mafia, she conquered it without losing her humanity. If you loved the gritty action, the intense loyalty, and the slow-burn romance between Emma and Kevin, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves a strong, unapologetic female lead, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next original story. What was your favorite tactical move Emma made? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.